My name is Binaz and I'm your host. We have two guests for this session, Chris Atherton and Simon Bostock. Chris is an interaction user experience specialist, excuse me, and Simon is a strategist, digital strategist. So the combination of the two gives us a very interesting topic to look into, and we are going to discuss, and they're going to share their experiences about what works, what doesn't work. Sometimes we get these challenges, and are there any tips that we can get from you? So we're going to spend the last hour of today around these topics. So welcome.
Hi. As Bernard said, there's two of us. That's Chris, just there, and that's me. Both of us actually. I know Bernard said that I do a strategy job. Both of us work together at gov.uk, so doing some of the government website things at the minute. That's a recent change. It's my fault, not anything else. So I don't know if you've seen the gov.uk site. That's what it looks like. Last year it won a design award. That's one of the designs of the year. And I think the response to the fact that this website won a Designer of the Year award is mixed, to say the least. This is a recent one that somebody said. And this is part of a much, much, much longer blog post. I don't know. I mean, it's not perhaps the prettiest thing in the world. The thing is about this, the thing about this particular website though is it's not really designed to be pretty. It's designed to be used by hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So having nice colours and pretty pictures isn't necessarily what the point of it is. Both of us do user experience stuff. I think people have been trying to explain what user experience is for a good long time. This is actually a relatively famous user experience person trying to explain what a user experience person does. This was his first attempt. He did iterate over this and have another stab 3 years later, and this is his second attempt. I think it's just a big land grab, basically. It basically says that user experience kind of touches everything, which is as good a description as everything,
we're
I guess.
pretty all-inclusive, comprehensive.
So there's a bit of kind of designing interfaces, and there's a bit of research, and there's a bit here. This is by somebody called Dan Saffer, by the way, who's great, who's a completely awesome person. I'm slightly making fun of his diagram, but he does a lot of really good work, so I have to get that in. So one of the things about user experience is that really not interested in satisfaction surveys. Really not interested in necessarily interested in passing around a design or and showing it to people and saying, what do you think about this? Not really a particularly useful activity. Really, with the gov.uk site, I don't think anybody's ever said, do you think it's pretty, or what do you actually think about the site? And I guess that's partly what we want to talk about this afternoon. Is what are we doing instead of asking people satisfaction surveys? Has anybody ever seen a film called They Live? That's the poster. Basically, it's about this guy here, and it's a kind of horror film, and when he puts these special glasses on, he sees the world as it really is, and that's what the world looks like. It's kind of got this, there's secret aliens living amongst us, and they're controlling our minds. Me and Chris in Liverpool a few years back met some people who were a bit like They Live, and I've never felt as naked as I did in front of these people. They did eye tracking things. So what they did is they put these kind of little glasses on people, and they went to supermarkets, actually. That was their thing. And what they found was that if you ask people about which products they buy in supermarkets, they pretty much always lie. If you ask people what brand, they very rarely go to Lidl or Aldi. They're always going to Waitrose. They're always buying good brands and things. So they started putting these eye tracking things. So what they do is they kind of watch where your eye is going. And the reason I felt really naked, the reason it reminded me of They Live, is when we started the meeting, they were kind of telling us about how eye tracking works. And they said that one of the things we have to get over is that everybody does the same thing when they're wearing these spectacles. Because when you first see somebody, I'm going to feel awful doing it now, but you look at their eyes, and then you kind of look down, and then you look at their chest, and apparently there was no exceptions to this. And immediately, you can imagine around this table, I'm just thinking, I can't actually look at these people sitting opposite on the other side. So
at least we were at a table where it was like today. It was kind of a restaurant table, and you couldn't look below the waist, and that was probably a blessing, actually.
So they're getting cheaper all the time. You can actually do eye tracking studies, but we're not using these. But what we do stuff is, rather than these kind of satisfaction surveys, do stuff like this is a kind of heat map. Have you ever seen a heat map? So basically, this is doing a dual thing actually. It's kind of tracking where the eyes are going, and it's also tracking where people are clicks. So you can see that the redder it is, the more eyes are looking there, and the more clicks. The clicks are marked by the X's. And this is the three, main search engines, I guess: Yahoo, MSN, and Google. And actually, they, from an eye tracking perspective, they look pretty. There's a pattern there. We can see that people are doing roughly the same thing when they come to this page. We can see if I was selling advertising for Google, I know where I'd want to sell my advertising, for example. That kind of top right place, anybody who's buying advertising down this kind of bit, well, it's a waste of time. Nobody's even looking there, for example. And again, that's that shot that's kind of illustrated what I just said, actually. But that top right advert is clearly worth something. The 3 down. Why anybody pay for that? It doesn't make any sense, really. Nobody's actually looking there. So I'm going to show you, just for a second, I'm going to show you some eye tracking things. And I think everybody's sitting next to at least one person, even this sparse table at the front. And I'd just like to, just having a look at these, just kind of, I'm going to show, I think 4 or 5, I can't remember actually, but with the person or the people sitting next to you, can you come up with any kind of generic rules? What could we infer from, this is not going to be a massively interactive session, by the way. Apologies for that. But just this next bit, what could you infer? What general rules could we come up with from these following? So I'm going to do it for probably not quite an uncomfortable amount of time, but like 5 or 10 seconds or something like that. So there's the first one. I'll leave it until the tumbleweed starts to blow, and then there's the second one, just there. A third one. The fourth one, which surprised me actually, interestingly enough. I think it surprised both me and Chris. Yep. This didn't perform as we would have expected, which is kind of a theme of what we'll talk about later on. And I think that's the last one, actually, this one completely conforms to what we'd kind of expect, I think. So, just really quickly, only a couple of minutes, any 2 or 3 things that we could learn in general about how people look at websites.
Karaoke King.
I've just realised that it's completely unfair for a person with a microphone to ask people without microphone to speak. But has anybody got a loud enough voice or confident enough voice to come up with a couple of things? No, what did you notice? Any? Yeah, particularly this one, isn't it? a trick that particularly people who are selling stuff, they often have faces and they look, and actually it's not so much the face, but it's where the face is looking, isn't it? And I think what you see there is there's a kind of, that's why I was surprised about this one here. You know, there's a kind of, it's not really following where that one. But yeah, people look at faces more than anything else. We're kind of programmed to do it, I guess. Any other things? Yeah, no, that's definitely true. But what did you notice about the Google? I mean, what did you notice about the Google Pack? You said the top left. Was there any? Was it just the top left? Or? Anything we could say? Yeah.
Well, it appeared to me that the first three bold letters of most paragraphs.
I think that's a really crucial point, and people call it it's the F plan, basically. People tend to read in an F shape, so they kind of start at the top left, they scan it, is it interesting, and they go there. And, you know, we can go further than that. People just don't read stuff. And we can be really, really confident there. They don't read, they kind of scan lines and paragraphs. Any other things? That was pretty much all the things I wanted to kind of add. Yeah?
Well, I mean, that's an assertion that that's how those pages are constructed.
Yeah, it is an assertion, definitely, and I think one of the things we'll say later is, you know, don't trust any of this stuff, but it's an...
Yeah, don't under any circumstances listen to anything that we're saying or trust it. It's, yeah.
It's definitely an assertion which is so prevalent that it has a name, and definitely one of those things, if you're looking for questions or things to test, I would start there, the fact that it has that F name. But you're right, absolutely, you have to be skeptical about this particular stuff. Right. No, we both spent an unproductive few minutes wondering why we would even include something that undermined our case so much. But yeah, my guess was that they wanted somebody to look at this. There's a call to action over here, that donate button, and my guess was that maybe they were trying to get people to draw their eye to the right-hand side to look at the donate button, which actually is fairly heavily looked at. But no, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no prospect of making eye contact with that face, so maybe that's less interesting. Don't know.
It's also frightening. It's not all
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned is that, you know, we'll actually say one of the things we learned later on, but yeah, for sure, all of those things. Okay, we're going to sort of go on, but I know it's really difficult because the room's massive, but if at any point we are saying stuff that really deserves a question, stick your hand up and we'll make sure that we stop. And yes, hello. Are you just testing? Yeah. I don't know because I'm actually working on something at that in a minute, and I'm quite curious to find out actually because I've just never.
As far as I know, you see the reverse pattern, but yeah, this is what we're showing you. This is very kind of Western left to right language reading centric pattern. You would expect to see something approximating the reverse, I think, for, say, Arabic or something that goes right to left. But yeah, we'll find out. If we come back next year, we'll tell you more about that.
So that's you? You've got your...
I do. I'm going to kidnap the clicker as well. Yeah, hi. So one of the things that we hope to emphasize, I guess, is that about the most important thing is really to sort of bear in mind what evidence you have, bear in mind what is known when designing a service. So we've just been talking, Simon's been talking about the F pattern, about that tendency to scan from the top left. Everything you'll see on gov.uk, with which we're involved at the moment on a particular project, you see that it's designed for scannability, it's designed for readability. It's not pretty, it wasn't built to be pretty, it was built to be functional. And so you don't ask people to read great, long, wide bits of text. You keep them in relatively narrow columns. Everything's left justified there. So, well, sorry, everything's hard left in terms of how it aligns, just to maximize that scannability so people can quickly find what they need. And, you know, that's been done through extensive testing, but also through knowledge of stuff like this F-pattern reading. We wanted to plug Julie Dirksen's book. Julie's actually in the room. Buy her book, please. Hi, Julie. She talks a lot about designing for how people learn, and it's a great book, and I encourage you to read it, really. It's full of stuff that will help you design learning. And we wanted to talk about a really similar thing, which is sort of designing for how people behave. And it's that sort of evidence-based. It's like watching people and going, right, okay, what are they doing? Right, how can we design for that? And part of how you do that is you've got to understand how people think and what they're thinking about, and what is the way that they think about the thing that you're making, or the topic that you're trying to teach them about. So a mental model is simply, I'm sorry, I don't want to patronize anyone in the room, but for anyone who doesn't know what a mental model is, it's really the kind of the construct that you have as a person of how a thing works or what a thing is like. I had a really poor mental model of Canada until I actually went there. So it was this kind of, it didn't really exist. It was just this kind of vague hypothetical construct of, you know, like there's some mountains and people seem nice and they talk a bit like Americans, and you know, and then you get there and your mental model becomes much more fleshed out as you visit the different provinces and you see what's actually happening. And so a mental model can vary in its complexity and vary in its accuracy. And it's almost more important to understand not the accuracy of people's mental models, but just what they're like. You know, your mental model of, actually no, sorry, let me backtrack. Let me show you, rather. So here's a nice example of what knowledge can look like and feel like. Julie's book talks about the idea of the wardrobe as a kind of, you know, the subject matter expert has this really well-organized wardrobe because all the stuff they know is nicely structured. This could be the wardrobe, the knowledge wardrobe of someone who's a bit new. It's growing organically, it's kind of a mess, it's hard to find anything, and it's not necessarily obvious in which way, you know, in which ways things relate to other things. So understanding what people's mental models are like, or that they don't have a strong mental model, is a really, really great place to start. If someone doesn't really know an area, a topic area, you might have to provide that structure for them. The less they know, the more they're going to need that structure. And so understanding, talking to the people who are going to be using your resources is really helpful to sort of start listening to the kinds of words that they use, the kinds of things that they're talking about, to understand, okay, what is their mental model of a thing. I worked at Skype briefly for a while, and we had people in who were less technologically literate, who were less familiar with computers, and who didn't know how Skype worked, they'd never used it. And they had this idea that it was basically, it was like a phone, but it was on your computer. And that was their mental model. You know, and it's fine, it's really, really good, except you get them to download, we got one gentleman to download the software onto the local desktop machine, and he then expected it to be on his phone. Because that was his model, is that a phone plus a computer. Totally legitimate, of course, you know, why would it not work like that? And of course, you know, we knew that it didn't, but he didn't, and that was fine. And so that let us understand his mental model of how Skype worked. It was really, really informative. So that's mental models. We also want to talk about attention, which is my kind of pet thing. So my Twitter handle is finite attention, you maybe saw at the start. I'm the big advocate for how little attention we have and how much it's important to do something useful with the attention that you can get from the people that you're trying to communicate with. So people have limited attention, it's a finite resource, it gets burnt up. Once you've spent it, you can't unspend it. For anyone who was here about 3 years ago when I talked about this, I'm just going to, you may have seen these slides before, but I'm just going to briefly recap what happens with working memory, which is sort of not the same as attention, but it occupies that same space. So the idea that basically you've got a finite buffet or sushi box of stuff, of resources that you can throw at a thing that you're trying to do. You can't have more than will fit in the box. You can change how you manage that resource. So if something has a certain intrinsic difficulty, then whatever is left over you can expend on how you deliver that information, and you know, give the person the opportunity to build schemas, so to flesh out that knowledge structure so their knowledge isn't lying all over the wardrobe. If that thing is more intrinsically difficult, you've got less room for other things. So understanding the intrinsic cognitive load of a thing, how difficult that is in itself to comprehend, how many moving parts it's got, if that's harder, then it leaves behind less attention for things like delivery and actually storing that knowledge in a useful way. If the delivery mechanism is really resource consuming, if you're asking people to do a lot of paying attention to a lot of things at once, and you know, you've got a kind of fixed cost for your intrinsic difficulty of how hard the thing is to grasp, You don't have very much space left in the sushi box for schema building. You don't have much architecture left, or much attention left to sort of produce that architecture to hang all the nice things on the hooks in the wardrobe. So it's really, really important not to overwhelm through delivery, because that just limits the amount of resources that you have for actual understanding and processing of that information. And basically, we're all limited by being able to hold a fixed amount of stuff. You know, your attention is finite, your working memory is finite. You might be familiar with the sort of 7 plus or minus 2 idea of working memory, and actually recent research suggests it's probably more like about 4 or 5 things plus or minus 2. Sorry. There's been this kind of general reduction in how much we think we can actually hold on to different new concepts at a time. So given that attention is finite, given that the resources you have to give to it, to any new information that you're learning, are finite, let's talk about priority. Let's talk about how we can help people prioritize the information, understand what the structure of the information is. So this is what is referred to as the angry fruit salad information design of say, sort of 10 years or so ago. There's a lot of things shouting for your attention here, and while there is some visible structure on the page, it's actually, you know, it's quite complicated, and it's a little bit shouty. So let's consider some things that are a bit more maybe plausible and a bit more modern. So this is a sort of anonymized web page that I came across recently and thought, yeah, I'm not sure. So one of the things that's interesting to think about is, what are the implicit rules that you are telling people when you give them a learning interface, which could just be a web form, something like this? What are the implicit rules that you are inculcating in them? So maybe just take a minute and look at this and tell me, what do you think the rules are on this page? Have a chat with the person next to you for maybe 30 seconds or so. I hope that's not too vague a question. I guess we'll see in a moment. Okay, any thoughts? Sorry, it's very simple, but... Oh, no buts. It's very simple. Okay. Yep, okay. Okay, so are we on... The implication of what you're saying is we are on page 1, or section 1. Yep, everyone agree with that? Brilliant. Okay, so that's a rule that we've absorbed about how this stuff works, isn't it? The one that's different is where we are at the moment. These are tabs or some other indication of positional information about where we are. It's really, really useful always in an interface to tell people where they are right now. Otherwise, they can't understand how they would get anywhere else, really. So we are here. Good. Is it possible to click on sections 2, 3, 4, and 5? Who thinks yes? Hands up. Ooh. Who thinks no? The majority. Right. Why not? Why do you think these are not clickable currently? They're grayed out. Okay. This is why we're here. Awesome. Yeah, they're grayed out, right? So the majority of people who put their hands up actually said that, like, they thought it was not clickable because they're grayed out, essentially. And this is really interesting, because when I came across this for real, that's exactly what I thought. They were actually totally clickable, but I didn't think they were, because I've absorbed, and you have absorbed, this rule that if something's kind of a grayish thing with like grey writing on it, it's probably not clickable, it's probably disabled. So that was an implicit rule that the designers of this didn't realize that they were actually falling into, you know. It was a mistake that they made in their design to accidentally make something that we've already learned a rule about. Who knew? Which way would you read here? If these are like content items, rows or columns? Why rows? Right. So The gaps between the horizontal items are shorter, so that implies some kind of continuity to read in rows, right? Again, that's a rule that we've all kind of absorbed, you know, like whether you read comics or whether you just look at content on the web generally, seems to be the case. And this employs the Gestalt grouping principle, you know, the idea that if things are close together, they in some way belong together. So we tend to parse these as like 3 rows of thing rather than 3 columns of something else. But it's really easy to mess that up when designing a UI. I've done this so often. I've seen people go to a form field and then read the text underneath it because that was actually the next question, but that wasn't sufficiently far away. And so people actually looked at the text underneath instead of the text above because they thought that was the nearest thing. Lots of white space was my take-home message from that. Make sure that you separate things out so that the things that are related to each other are the things that are nearest to each other. This is kind of fun. What's the middle thing? Or? Right. Okay. Context is everything. If you're reading horizontally, be tempted to read that as a B, perhaps, or you could see how it might be a B. If you're reading vertically, it's 13. People will be looking for the thing that is appropriate to their context. If they're coming through a list, they're going to see that as 13. If they're coming through the alphabet, they might be tempted to parse it as a B. And that obviously depends on how big it is and how clear it is and everything else. Context will dictate entirely how you deal with particular information, just simply perceptual information. So let's talk about priority. What is the most important thing on this page? The headings at the bottom, because, okay. The blue bits. Okay. Any others? Ooh, okay, so bold is important, big is important, call to action is important. Anything else? Too much? Yeah, so there's a conflict of priority here, right? Again, I have seen stuff that was exactly like this, and all it was actually was that someone had used boxes in PowerPoint, and it had automatically resized the font, helpfully, slightly too helpfully, it turned out. And yeah, actually the most important thing was the thing at the top, the first thing, but these had ended up being bigger because there was less text in those. And those were actually just like marginal subpoints about the original thing. Again, we absorb these rules, right? We absorb that big must be important, we absorb that a call to action must be important, we absorb that the thing at the top or the thing that's in bold must be important. It's so easy to miscommunicate rules by mistake. What's the most important thing on this page? Search box. Kindle. Is it fair to say that there's lots of important content on this page? Yeah. What I think is amazing about Amazon is how successful it is, given this kind of explosion of things that might be important. And they managed to pull off that thing about being all things to all people, because they've got a huge, you know, they're trying to reach a really, really wide audience. And I guess you'll find the thing for you. And this defies all design principles that I believe in terms of kind of brevity and so on. Yes? Absolutely. I think we all go towards the things that we're interested in. So if I had come to Amazon just because someone had told me about it, and I thought, oh, I'll have a look at this, I might be a bit overwhelmed, but I think the majority of people go to Amazon because they want to buy a thing, right? And you come there looking for something, and our visual search is very good, and you kind of scan the page, and you look at all the salient things and go, that's the one that I want. So yeah, absolutely. I do really think that a common principle of user experience is that people go towards stuff that they are into. And it's just about opening that door for everybody. They're opening a lot of doors on this page. Right, right. But when you're logged out, when you're not logged into Amazon, it has to kind of do all oh, you might be interested in this, 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 or this. So chocolates, flying monkeys, DVDs of stuff here. What do you fancy? Mm. Right. That fear of like, what's happening is, I think, a really common one, whether it's in the sales or, you know, like on the web, is people get overwhelmed easily by a lot of content. And again, it comes back to that, okay, how can we just show you enough so that you know what you need to do next? 15 pages of menu, yeah. What's good? Yeah. True, true. It's important, I think, to talk about accessibility, and I'm going to talk about this in the widest possible sense. So accessibility is, I think, sometimes it's used to mean very specific things, like provision for people who require a screen reader, that kind of thing. I like to think about it often as a more general term, that like what you're making should be accessible in all senses to people who might want to use it. So one of the things that is really, really easy, and I'm so guilty of doing this, really easy to do, is design things that you interact with a keyboard for people who are looking at the screen. But actually what happens is when people are interacting with a thing by using a keyboard, is that they're looking at the keyboard. A lot of people type like this, or even like this. And some people, even who can like put, like mostly touch type, they look at the keyboard and then they look up and they're like, oh, what just happened? So anything that happens while they're looking at the keyboard, doesn't matter, didn't happen. So it's really tempting, like we talk about this a lot at work, things like autocomplete for, what country do you live in? Start typing. And there's this lovely tool that we're hoping to put in that basically just auto-completes the country as you start typing it. Even if you start typing in the middle of the word, it will recognize that fragment and go, did you mean? And that's lovely, except that when you're looking down, you're not seeing this thing helping you. So you get to the end of a badly misspelled word and then go, this is rubbish, why is this not working for me? So one of the ways in which you can find that out is just by sitting with people and watching how they type and how they engage with your thing. And just little stuff like this comes out where you're just like, wow, we built a really amazing thing that only about 5% of people who can touch type actually use. Obviously there's problems for accessibility. There's problems with like making content that's very hard to read. It can be small or faint or whatever. High contrast is really good. And again, you see this on gov.uk, everything's like really readable. I'm sorry, I keep banging the gov.uk drum. We did not build most of gov.uk. We are involved in a gov.uk project, but I'm a huge admirer of what the original team did to make it in the first place, because it's so usable. Think also about colourblindness. There are going to be some people for whom distinguishing between these two things, like if you've got a key somewhere that says, okay, here's a graph, and like, this is what these different colours mean, that's going to be no good to a proportion of the population who are colourblind and don't distinguish between sort of mauve and blue very well. Are they different? Yes, they're different colours, yes. Thank you for illustrating my point, I appreciate that. Yeah, so different colours are going to be problematic, subtly different colours. Basic rule, I guess, try not to use red and green alone to distinguish between two things. So if you want to indicate that something is good or bad, use some other visual indicator as well. Words or a logo or something like that to differentiate. There's also blue-yellow color blindness that can occur as well, and like, sort of subtler things like the difference between two kind of pinky-bluey shades. Friend of mine who's fairly profoundly colorblind bought this lovely, elegant grey bed linen And then his boyfriend said, Roger, why have you bought fuchsia bed linen? And he was like, oh God, I have, haven't I? Yeah, so it's quite common. Yeah. 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 But you dine out on those, which is awesome. Yeah. That's cool. I think a really important facet of what we're trying to do as user experience designers and service designers is to preserve some kind of humility. Like, it's incredibly easy to be sort of arrogant and go, oh, check out this thing that I made, it's awesome, I did this e-learning thing, and it's like, it's whiz-bang, and it's got all these colors everywhere. And that usually lasts about 5 seconds. So I'm massively paraphrasing here. But essentially, no wireframe survives contact with the users. So, you know, you can make the best thing ever, and then you put it in front of a real person who actually might use that, and within 30 seconds, they've totally destroyed it by going, what? Why? How do I even get past the first page? And that's great. And the challenge is, honestly, just to go, not, oh, they killed my baby, but, you know, but like, wow, thank you for telling me that, because now I know this is wrong and I can fix it. And it's so much better to have that knowledge of this is wrong and I can fix it than it is to go through going, la la la, I made a brilliant thing. So humility, it gets easier. Initially, when you put out your very, very carefully thought through things, it can feel really painful to get feedback from people if you're not used to that kind of brutal, you know, here it is, do what you will with it kind of approach. But rapidly, you just reap the benefits in terms of people come back to you and they say, I really like this, but whatever. It's not all bad also. Sometimes people will delight you because they'll just give you, you know, they'll give you really nice feedback. They go, do you know what, I really like the bit where this happened. And even if it was a total accident, you can go, oh, well, you know, thanks, that's cool. Yeah. Absolutely. I guess what that says is you can't please all the people all the time. And I guess I'm much less interested in I liked or didn't like, and I'm much more interested in I couldn't understand or I didn't get past that. So, again, to come back to gov.uk, you know, it's not designed in the sense of, you know, aesthetic and beautiful. It's brutal, but it's really functional. And I would much rather get feedback from people going, I got to the end really fast and I didn't expect to be able to do that. Or I got stuck on page 2. You know, I'm interested in that kind of goal-based feedback, if you like, not the kind of aesthetic, did I like it, was it nice, sort of fuzzy, happy sheet kind of feely stuff. Again, that's a bit brutal, but the metric that's most important is, do people get to the end? Can they get to the end? You know, in sort of brutal terms, it's about conversion, it's about click-through in sort of e-commerce kind of terms. You know, do people get all the way through the process that they're trying to get all the way through? If they like it, it's nice. I'm not suggesting we should all build really ugly things, unless you really like doing that. But I think it's more important to go, is this usable?
Can I give an analog example?
Please. Yeah, I've done the exact same thing, yeah. In the building where I live now, in fact, embarrassingly. Yeah. So to get over yourself fundamentally and to just get into it, go test. Put the thing that you're making in front of people. Don't be shy. First of all, people really like being asked for their opinion. And they also really like being offered tea and biscuits. I'm just saying sometimes that can smooth the transition. But if you go to a person, actually, I really like your opinion on this thing. Have you got half an hour to sit with me and just go through this? And it's really, really good. If you record it, if you can use, you know, Camtasia or, you know, like any kind of screen capture software. or just like a simple webcam if you want, it's invaluable because you will quickly find stuff that you had never thought of. No wireframe survives contact with the user, basically. Like, the things that you thought were gimmies, turns out they're really, really hard for people to understand. The things that you weren't sure about, people just breeze through. So it's a really good sense checker. And the whole point of doing that is do it early. Don't wait until the end of having built this amazing thing. Start with the so-called crappy first draft and basically just keep going. So like everyone's familiar with this kind of learning cycle, right? Exactly the same applies in user experience. Plan a thing-ish, come up with some kind of dirty, filthy prototype, throw it at people, get feedback, think about what they said, iterate, keep doing it. It's exactly the same process. And it's so valuable. And it's much, much better for your organization if you can get them on board with this and go, look, rather than just get to the end and go, actually, there are some serious problems with this, but we don't have time to make any changes. Test early, test often, iterate. This is the kind of lo-fi wireframing that we end up doing quite often at work. It's just, okay, I need to think about this. Let me just sketch this, give it to someone, and they go, what about that? And they go, okay. I'm not taking the time to build it. I'm not even prototyping it. I'm just sketching it on a piece of paper, and then I'm going to get feedback from someone, and they'll find the problem for me within 5 seconds. And just keep doing that. And then build something a little bit bigger and test that and iterate. And I'm going to hand back to Simon because I talked for far too long.
Is the mic? Yeah. So there's a game company I worked with a while back, actually, talking about that kind of testing stuff, and they had a big, I can't remember the letters, actually, I can't rattle them off, but they had big letters on the wall, and I asked what they stood for, and it was kind of D, blah, 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 long thing, but it was do it now, do it badly, go home by 6. And they had a thing where they would just launch something once every day and get some tests on it. One of the other things that talking about is this idea of satisfying, and so the idea, I think, going back to the Amazon thing, when you go to that, somebody said, when you go there, you have a purpose, you're kind of interested, you know what you want to do. I think that is true a lot of the time. People do have something that they want to do, they have a task that they want to achieve, but I think we sometimes overstate that. We've got that idea of homo economicus, this person who is carefully looking at interface. Okay, there's a button there, and there's a button there, and there's a button there, and there's a button there. I'm going to weigh up the options of which of those 4 buttons is most likely to give me success, and then I'm going to press the one which is logically speaking to me. But in fact, that's not. This is it's not what people do really. They kind of have this kind of subconscious mind that goes. And what you find when you watch people. And again, it's one of the reasons I'm so distrustful or mistrustful of asking people what they think about stuff, and why I'm much more focused about task completion is because when you ask people, why did you click that button? Very, very often, and more often than I would care to mention, they have absolutely no idea. And the reason they did it is because it was red, or it was because it was near, or it wasn't very far away from something, and they just want to click on something. And we see this kind of all the time. This is a website that I looked at a while back. It's not, it's not supposed to be particularly exciting. It's a chemical company, and when you look at this site, when you look at where people are clicking, can you guess which is a really popular page on this site? I mean, there's no particular hierarchy to the page, but one of the things that there was being suggested was, can we get rid of our About Us page? They were, thinking about being quite funky because nobody's really interested in the About Us page. But on this particular site, everybody's clicking the About Us page. And why are they doing that? Well, because there's nowhere to click really. So I might as well just click there. And so you go there, and you find that kind of throughout the site. I just show this as an illustration of one of the things Chris was saying. Guess which bits are clickable on this page? Which bits are clickable? You would expect all of these bits, wouldn't you? All of these things. Yeah, they really look clickable. That's the only bit that's clickable on this entire page. So they're kind of developing a pattern because users really want to know which section of the website they're in. So what we're doing is we're color coding all of those things. But anyway, going back to the top, this is the About Us page, by the way. It is as exciting as you would imagine, and as full of useful information as you would imagine. But people are clicking on this. You get people who say we've got to keep. The analytics are telling us that people are clicking on the About Us page, so we need an About Us page. They're clicking on that because it's in the top left, I think. And you get this idea of something called a dirty magnet. You know, this is a piece of useless content. It's a useless button. It's a useless piece of navigation. But people are clicking on it, and your data is showing you that people are clicking on it simply because it draws the eye more than anything else. If you do a Google search for dirty magnet, you'll come up with a bunch of articles and examples of it. Yeah, I'm going to skip past that. So, going back to this idea of, you know, of iteration and mistrusting people's opinions about stuff. Like Chris was talking about, you know, task-based testing. You know, here's a job, go to the end of it, and not really anything more than that. I did an expert review on this site. So I was really excited to get this job, actually, because it's, you know, it's for the Queen and all of those kind of things. And it is also the kind of work that I really like, because I get to stay at home and just click on the internet all day and write a nice report at the end of it. But there was a kind of expert review, and the job was I had to look at similar sites and see how it stacked up and compared against, you know, the V&A and a bunch of other cultural sites. And in the end, I just gave up because it was, you know, one of the questions was, how do we perform? Are we better or worse than all of the other museum sites, all of the tourist attractions? And the actual answer was, and this applies definitely to e-learning, was it's exactly the same as every other museum site out there. They all have the same kind of navigation at the top. They all have the same user experience, and they're all equally bad. And I don't mean that as a criticism, actually. I can imagine if I had a limited amount of time and money to build this website, that's probably what I'd do as well, because, you know, you can't go wrong having the same website as everybody else, in the same way you can't really go wrong doing loads of multi-choice things and media things in e-learning if everybody else is doing it. What did I do then? What was my feedback? I couldn't really go back to the meeting was going to be at St James's Palace. Again, I really did enjoy this, but I couldn't really go back to them and say, well, you know, I've conducted an expert review, and here is my big conclusion. Your website is as bad as everybody's else, so carry on going. So what I actually did with this was there's a kind of pop-up test. You know, Chris was talking about testing with paper prototypes. I just found a stranger, and really, I knew them actually, but very vaguely, and I used Camtasia. This is actually a test of one of the things on gov.uk. So this is a prototype, a really rough and ready prototype done in Balsamic, which is a wireframing tool. And with Camtasia, what you can do is you can record you know this, don't you, because you do this all the time. So you get to see their face. And so my feedback, normally I would have gone in and done this big, oh, you're breaking loads of usability crimes and all that kind of stuff. But all I did was I asked somebody to book a ticket at Buckingham Palace. That was it. I just asked them to do that, and then I played them the film of somebody trying to book a ticket with no sound, by the way. So there was just this person in the corner of the screen. I said, you know, book a ticket. And it was brilliant, honestly. They were just all looking at it. And this poor woman trying to book a ticket, her face, she was so confused. And you could see that she was kind of muttering to herself and swearing. And she completely failed the task. And that as a piece of kind of pop-up testing, and it's something that happened all the time. So Chris, for example, at gov.uk will show a film. You know, you'll get some business people, and they're all saying, you know, this looks pretty good. It does exactly what the policy says it does. And then Chris will show them a film of, no, actually, they have no idea what your official language means. They have no idea what this button does. And so that kind of pop-up testing, you know, guerrilla testing, as it's sometimes called, I think I would take any day over any number of kind of careful analysis, I think. I have no idea why we were going to show that particular thing. So I'm just going to skip past that into the last bit. Say again? Yes. So the kind of conclusions then of wrapping up all of the things we said, it really is that there are some patterns. You know, we do know a lot about people. We do know about that kind of F thing, and it doesn't apply all the time, but we do know that people are scanning. We do know people are satisfying. You know, they're not optimizing behavior. We do know that they're kind of doing this kind of stuff. But we also know that everything that we know has so many exceptions that actually it's far better to approach this not as an expert, but as a kind of like Zen, humble person. Because actually the fact that you know all of this kind of stuff counts for pretty much nothing when you actually stick a design in front of people. And we've spoken to a few people this afternoon about, you know, how do you approach testing? And pretty much everybody has said, I'm not looking at look just in case it about, but pretty much everybody has said that actually testing gets shoved out because it's too expensive, it happens too late, you're on a deadline, all of these kind of things. I would say, so what? You know, you don't have to do very expensive testing processes, but it's more expensive not to do it than it is for it to get squeezed out. Like I say, the only way I've ever really had any success doing that is by showing an actual user's face on film. But there you go. We know some kind of useful stuff about people as well. We know that people have, you know, kind of very strong mental models. We know that, for example, it's a good idea if you're going to do a calendar, make it look like a paper calendar. You know, you might have seen with that kind of whole debate with iPhones and stuff. You know, like the skeuomorphism debate. You know, making something look like a real word counterpart. We know that people's attention. You know, one of the things people talk about is when you build a kind of interface. It's a good idea to think of it as a kind of leaky bucket. You know, this is their patience, and they have to get through your interface. And if that patience runs out, you know, they're just going to leave and they're going to completely fail. And so that's, you know, that's a kind of thing with attention. We know that priority and grouping, I'm not going to say, you know, Chris gave a couple of rules, but I'd say, you know, it's actually harder than you imagine. You produce something which you look at your design and you go, oh, it's really clearly laid out. And then you show it to somebody else and they have a completely different idea of it. And we also know that people satisfy us. You know, they just go into a click frenzy. Basically, they click the nearest button they are. And I'm sure everybody likes to think that, you know, not my interface. You know, they're going to look at my interface and they're going to have, you know, they're going to carefully think about it because they were going to recognize the genius that's gone into it. But actually, you know, that's sadly not the case. Well, a guy I know actually talks about the internet as being a fridge. He says, you know, like, when we design interfaces, we design for people's goals. You know, and when you go to the fridge, you have a goal. And of course, I don't know, how many times have you ever gone to the fridge and you look into the fridge and, like, why am I looking to the fridge? You know, there's no real sense. I didn't go to the fridge. It's just like, have we got anything interesting to eat? I'm going to eat a gherkin or whatever. So that's the kind of idea of satisficing that, you know, you don't necessarily have a goal, and that kind of goal-based stuff might be a bit overrated. I think we also have a pretty good idea of how to approach user experience stuff as well. We know that really those kind of twin things of iteration, you'll never get it right on the first time. And we know that testing kind of works as well. And in fact, for any serious thing with any serious number of users, it's a what's the word I'm looking for? You can't choose. You know, it's a mandatory item, I think. And if there's just one point that I've learned, really, really painfully, actually, and I'm not joking, it was really, really painfully, is that even one real user going through your thing will give you more information than you care to actually absorb, I think. There is a statistic about this. One of the world's leading experts on usability is a guy called Jacob Nielsen. Anybody know Jacob Nielsen? He does it's a Danish person. He's got a really excellent user experience newsletter. And he kind of quotes this statistic that Chris hates, because Chris is a scientist, so she hates kind of statistics that aren't backed up by a lot of evidence. But it's kind of catchy. He says that you get 90% of your feedback from your first user. I agree with Chris, by the way. This is absolute nonsense. But the idea of it, you know, if you've only got one user, then you occasionally get people saying, well, you know, it's not really worth doing testing because it's not really scientific. Because there's only, you know, Chris does stuff in Starbucks, and it works. You know, we get iteration, we get improvement. So one user's enough. I think, if I've done this right, that's the last slide. Yes, there you go. So is there any questions? The other slide.
Tom Hanks.
Oh, that's yeah. Yeah, I think it kind of repeating the same kind of thing. There are some like really well-known patterns. So, you know, that stuff going across the top, people are so used to that. As Chris showed, I think one of the slides, that there is that kind of, if you have those, you know, let's force people to go to the bottom of the page, and then we'll put a big next button. That kind of stuff can, I don't know, it can trip up. There's something I read recently was a guy on a job interview with Amazon. And I'll get to your point in a second. One of the things they asked him on this interview on the phone was, you know, how would you improve the Amazon website? And this was it came from left field. He wasn't prepared for it, so he kind of thought about it in the end. And he said, well, I guess you people have tested the heck out of this, because actually that's the culture at Amazon. You've got loads of data on it, and therefore I wouldn't change anything, because you've probably really tested it. And so the converse of that is, like, I genuinely don't know. Like, it's not just humbleness. Like, I've seen sites, so I've worked on intranets where they had one particular one, it was one of the complaints about the intranet was that nobody knew which of these massive sections, so they renamed them after the people. So, you know, one of the sections, instead of being HR, it was like Jones section, because she was the fearsome person who worked in HR. And so they successfully came up with a solution for a really long navigation. But look, I genuinely don't know, honestly. I realise that's really unsatisfactory. Chris, maybe...
Yeah.
I think that's where it gets really complicated, actually, because actually finding a good search product for an LMS or a website or an intranet is actually really hard. So you might say, yeah, let's stick a search box on the home page and be like Google, but actually Google built really good search engines. And
yeah. Can I just add a little bit to that, which is just that I think, I agree with Simon, it's really complicated. I think one of the two distinctions that I would probably make is it for someone who knows the area very well, like a subject matter expert, or is it for someone who's coming there relatively fresh? So I think with people who are expert, I think you can be a bit freer about navigation, and people who don't know very much or might lack confidence in that space, it's maybe more important to try and funnel them through a thing. So like that checkout flow is like on places like Amazon is designed for someone who's first time, you know, it's like the first time doing shopping, like they're really clear calls to action, and it kind of helps you through, and it's got this nice clearly visible left to right kind of, you know, navigation sort of progress indicator kind of thing going on, and that's designed to help even the kind of the newest person get through that. Or if you want them to complete a particular task, then maybe leading them through a funnel by the nose, which is a really mixed metaphor, is the way to go. So that's one thing, the sort of expertise, and I guess it comes back to that structure thing about, you know, like how is your wardrobe organised, you know, and is it organised like a novice or like a subject matter expert?
I think there's a hygiene thing. So there's something called the Kano model, which again is kind of really useful to, it's K-A-N-O, it's like a Japanese product design thing. And what it kind of says is that, you know, you can add a bunch of aesthetic stuff off to something, you know, can make something delightful. But if you don't get the basics right, then actually it counts for nothing. You know, so if you've got a rock solid basis, then, you know, by all means you can begin to sort of iterate and add that kind of delightful stuff on top. Counterpoint to that is that, you know, people at the best of time don't. You know, if you take like compliance training, for example, people are never going to find that, so they might. But you know, I think everybody's familiar with that idea of the chocolate cover of broccoli thing. You know, it doesn't really matter how beautiful you make something which people find painful in the first place. If you look at gov.uk, and I guess the same would be true of many large enterprises with their e-learning stuff. Every bit of sort of fancy design or imagery you put on there has an upside to it. Hey, they really like the pictures, but it also has a massive downside. So you imagine putting pictures of people on gov.uk. Oh, well, where is the 2% Mongolian immigrants who live in Brighton? You know, it would be really hard to do. I would hate to do it, and for me, the downside outweighs the upside. And the same is true with e-learning. We have any more stock images of multiracial people shaking hands, for example. You know, that's the kind of canonical example of how stuff goes wrong. But it's like designing stuff like that looks good, really hard. And I think for 9 times out of 10, I'd probably skip it. That's because I'm a caliper, and I have to test stuff. But so I think one of the clearest examples of that would be, let's say you went back 10 years and you built a website with a timeline. I think users would have gone, what the heck is that? You know, it just showed me, I'm used to categories. Now I've got this randomly changing, and it's going date order first, and there's the new one. Old hat now. You know, that I think that would be a kind of really a pattern that all of us have got to use to. So I think, yes, you're chasing a moving target. You know, users are we're adaptive. All of us are learning. We're all getting better at this stuff. I think one of the interesting things, sorry, I'm talking a lot, Chris, but one of the interesting things I think about, you know, like if you look at fashion, for example, you kind of have avant-garde, and then people are coming out with these really weird clothes, and then 3 or 4 years later you see them kind of echoes of them on the street. And I often wonder where the avant-garde is in user experience, but the truth is it's us, you know, it's people who design this stuff. We're much more familiar with these things. You know, people the range of gestures that people can do on tablets, for example, that pinch thing and the long press and the double tap, and there's a huge vocabulary there of stuff. So yeah, absolutely. And then the flip side of that is everything we build now is going to be out of date and rubbish in 3 or 4 years' time, which is sad. Sorry.
I just wanted to add one thing, I suppose, which is that there's this kind of user adoption curve, I guess, of all the things Simon's just been talking about, right? So there's like people who kind of, they know all the rules of how technology and how the web behaves. And then at the other end, you've got all these people who are just catching up to how the web works and maybe don't have a computer at home. They might have a smartphone. They might check Facebook on their smartphone. And I've tested with people like this, and it's really, really interesting because you find that they accidentally scroll down to the bottom of the page and they start randomly clicking on the footer, on links in the footer, because they haven't absorbed the rule that this is a footer. Like, they don't have the vocabulary of the web even to go, this is different content from the rest of the page, even though it's a different color and the links are a different color and things like that. And I think the most important thing is that while it's brilliant that we can absorb all these new trends and try and design interaction more imaginatively, we've got to carry those guys along with us. So it's like teaching a mixed ability class, essentially. You know, like you have to carry the lowest and the slowest with you if everyone else is going to go along as well. Sorry, the lady at the other table. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
developers. They built all this kind of stuff. We used to, like, actually we can't show what's behind this button, so let's have a beautiful hover, and when we hover over it, it's going to give us all this information, but you can't hover on tablets. So even something as trivial, you know, we got used to what is actually a quite complex interaction. Hover over something to reveal more information, and then suddenly hover gets taken away from us. And I work with web developers, and most of them didn't really realize it for 18 months. You know, you would think it's obvious that we'd lost hover, but no, you know, Apple didn't send a notice round saying, hey, by the way, guys, you know, we don't have a hover anymore. People had to learn it the hard way. And of course, you've got the hit areas as well. Like, the hit areas are, painful.
The only other thing I would add, I guess, is that we're seeing much more, obviously, responsive design. So not so much let's build a separate mobile website, but, you know, let's allow people to view this on devices with any screen size, and let's shrink the content accordingly. And that's actually where you get the real value from thinking about stuff like the F pattern and all that kind of nice left justified stuff. Because if you've got stuff slewn across the screen, then when you start shrinking the screen size, it becomes quite difficult to predict, well, where's all that stuff across on the right going to end up when you kind of narrow the screen? Whereas if you're thinking about, well, people scan from the left, okay, let's pile all the stuff down the left anyway, and then when you shrink the screen, it's not really painful at all. And it's quite a gradual transition, and it still looks the same on mobile as it does on tablet, as it does on a desktop machine.
We forgot to do one thing, actually. We promised we were going to share some resources, but which we didn't do. But one of the links I would have shared was there's a piece called Content Choreography, which talks about how responsive design, how it really changes things. Because the idea is that, you know, you might just sort of say, well, let's stack everything on top of each other. But I can't explain it because it's a really quite interesting and complex post. But Content Choreography, I think it's by Trent Walton. It's really interesting. Trent Walton. Sorry, Dennis.